Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pleased to be here and to see you here. My name is Connie Nshemereirwe, who was just introducing me. Yes, Nshemereirwe, you are close. If it's too difficult for you to pronounce, my name means I am happy, so you can just call me Happy. I'd like to introduce my very distinguished panel, and I'll start with Miss Butterfield, who's standing right here, who's the Miss K. Actually, I put these in order, in another order, but it's okay, you can come up. I think, pardon me, they'll just allow me to, I don't know if all my speakers are here. Okay, I'll just start in the order in which they'll speak. Dr. Haruo Takeda, yes, there he is, who is the corporate chief engineer of Hitachi Limited. Please come up. Let's give him a clap as he comes up. Next is Emeritus Professor. Is he here? Oh, yeah, here he is. Michael Barber. Please give him a clap. And now, Ms. K. Butterfield, please come up. Let's give her a clap. Next is Mr. Xavier Estico. Please come up. Give him a very big clap. Last but not least, Mr. William Colglazier, please. This is my chair, doctor. Oh, there's one chair missing. Great. After that start, I'd just like to briefly introduce the session, and then I'll ask my first speaker to come up. We all know that the global goals have the power to end poverty and fight inequality and stop climate change. But just with the 12 years effectively to achieve these goals, we recognize that socio-technological systems need to be transformed at a rather rapid rate. And to quote the former New Zealand Prime Minister who was here this morning, Helen Clark, when she was the director of the UNDP, said that transformation means that low-carbon, green and inclusive economies and societies require fundamental changes in the way we live, work, and do business. So given the pressing need and time frame for rapid transformation, the transitions are vital within each country and each context to happen really quickly. The question remains that, however, how these transitions can be implemented and managed while also not at odds with any of the global goals. We hope that our distinguished panel of speakers will throw light on this, and I really look forward to the session with everyone in the room. Each speaker has 10 minutes, and at the end of that, we shall open to the floor for about half an hour, so do keep your questions ready. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. You have your Dr. Haruo's, Takeda's PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm Haruo Takeda from Hitachi Limited. And it was very interesting for me to see HuffPost reporting my talk in the United Nations last year. It was May 2017 in New York at the Science Technology Innovation Forum of the United Nations. They say that there are strong arguments to be made about why a for-profit company should care about better environment, gender, equity, peace, so on. Private enterprises are often absent from any national policy on achieving SDGs in various countries. But this is important, Japan being a notable exception. where corporate leadership from Hitachi as part of the national and the transnational effort in achieving SDGs. That's why I'm here, in the middle of the government people, as the only one in this community from the industries. Unfortunately, but it was rather than Hitachi, but it was EAJ, the Engineering Academy of Japan, where I read the SDGs project in a belief that there is no doubt science is a key to achieve SDGs. Every science will go through industries in some form before it contributes to SDGs. A process from science through industry to society will not be in time for 2030. So innovation in collaboration among academia, industries, and the government is indispensable for achieving SDGs. That was my idea. And then the major outputs of the SDGs project of EAJ is number one, we have established the Japan Association of Finance for Sustainable Development to invent the indexes connecting enterprise values to SDGs and to standardize them to involve more companies in more serious ways into SDGs. And the number two is that I led in International Standardization Organization in Geneva, the SDGs strategy task force in its strategy board. Number three was that I just gave a proposal to the Japanese government on the policy of science, technology, and innovation for academia, industries, and the government to work more intimately together for SDGs. I did that after discussions around the world, including the one in US at the STI Forum of the United Nations, as I said, and at the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science. And in Africa, at the next Einstein Forum, at a panel discussion with an audience of 1,000. And in Japan, we held the first International SDGs Forum. We organized that, and that was participated by tens of countries around the world. So all those discussions, after all those discussions, I did something I said before. EAJ belongs to CATES, the International Council of Academies of Engineering and Technological Sciences. And objective of CATES is to advise governments and international organizations on technical and policy issues. But what is more important is B, it's to promote sustainable economic growth and social welfare through the world. This was written long before SDGs was born. So I, as a member of EAJ and CATES, I am obliged to do something for SDGs. This is my proposal to the government. Number one, the Japanese government should do holistic discussions of SDGs based on the mapping of all the national budget for STI, which is $40 billion US dollars, to SDGs. And I drew such a map. And number two, let universities issue integrated reports for taxpayers to know more ultimate values of the researches there for humankind. And number three is that let every national level issue an integrated report, like enterprises, for the government to design larger academia, industry, government projects for SDGs. And the last three, I said that let ODA involve more academia on both sides to build more sustainable collaboration among academia, industries, and the government. And this is my answer to the homework from Colin. This is a theory of change by myself, learned from 100 years of Hitachi since its establishment of 1910. I divided the 100 years into 4 parts. In the first quarter, the Japanese economy went up by the World War I and down by Great Depression. And in the second quarter, up by stronger elements and down by the World War II. And Reconstruction came and oil crisis. And a bubble came and burst. So to conquer such a big tidal wave, Hitachi, to survive, added new business in every quarter. Hitachi started its business mainly in the machine parts business. And in the second quarter, we added physical systems business. And in the third quarter, we added consumer products business. And in the fourth quarter, we added the cyber systems business. And what is more important is that we established new research and development center every 25 minutes, at 25 years. The first one was Hitachi Research Lab, was established in the first quarter, and it contributed a lot to initiate the new business in the second quarter. And CRL, which stands for Central Research Lab, contributed a lot to initiate consumer product business in the third quarter. SDL, Information Technology Lab, initiated the Cyber Systems 1. And ARL is the research lab established in the fourth quarter. And please note that I was the general manager of ARL in 2010. So I need to make a new business in the fifth quarter. My background is artificial intelligence. And as a student of the University of Tokyo, I wrote a machine learning program of a neural network for the game of Go 40 years before AlphaGo did. And as a scientist, I was at the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Stanford. And these days, I am the chairman of the advisory board of Artificial Intelligence in NEDO, Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industries, the leader of Ministry of Intelligent Infrastructure at Ministry of Education, Culture, Science, and Technologies, and a member of the advisory board of Artificial Intelligence in the Cabinet Office. So this is the summary of my talk with 40-year experience in AI, which I think are technological key for SDGs. And as I am responsible for creating a new business in fifth quarter for a company, and I'm assuming I'm playing a transdisciplinary role in the government as I work for various ministries. And I was appointed by a global media, a notable exception for the national and transnational effort in achieving SDGs. So I must and I will challenge innovation in academia, industry, government collaboration for SDGs. Thank you very much.
I must say 10 minutes is a terribly short time, but thank you very much for bringing this perspective of industry to us. I'm glad that Hitachi is the exception to the rule. So really happy to have you here. We started a little bit late, so I'll just like to move on to the next speaker, who is Professor Emeritus Michael Barber, who will take the floor.
Thanks, Connie. It is a great pleasure to be here at INGSA 2018. I did attend the first one in 2014, and I have to commend to Peter the growth and influence of this organisation. As identified up here, I have been a member for the last few years of a working group set up by the Inter-Academies Partnership to look at improving science advice in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. What I want to do this afternoon in my 10 minutes is just make a few general comments around science and technology. As Peter, I think, knows, I can be slightly provocative, and I will attempt to be slightly provocative, but not too provocative this afternoon. I think the work on the IAP panel has certainly convinced me to something that has been well articulated both today and elsewhere. Science and technology and innovation, STI in short, is important, indeed essential, to advancing almost all of the goals. But alone, it will not deliver any. I also believe very strongly that business as usual is not going to deliver the SDGs, and certainly not by 2030. And that I think applies as much to STI. So in my 10 minutes, I'd like to make some comments upon two issues, which I think are germane to the discussion of this session, and also to the wider conference. Firstly, I'd like to comment on something we don't really talk much about, and that's technology's social license to operate. Because after all, if there is no social license to operate, then I think it's a little ambitious to see that technological solutions will be readily accepted and widely adopted. And then secondly, I would like to make an answer to the question posed of us: how is science and technology engaging with the SDGs, and how might that engagement be improved? In doing so, I want to cycle back to that comment I made earlier, that business as usual will not suffice. And that applies as much to the science policy around the SDGs. So let me say a few words about the social license to operate. I think the first thing to say, and it comes really to the core of one of the issues that INGSA tries to get, that is building capacity in countries. Because while the reach of modern technology is essentially global, its acceptance is local. And recently, in an interesting survey, the Dentsu Aegis Network and Oxford Economics asked 20,000 people in 10 countries a question core to our mission: can digital technology make the world a better place by helping solve the biggest problems of our time, including poverty, hunger, and climate change? The results are rather interesting. Only in China did a majority, 78%, answer yes. The average across the 10 countries was 42%, with the United States at 38% and my country, Australia, at 40%. So in the technically developed West, we're sceptical that that technology can solve. And somewhat surprisingly, in Japan, often seen as so acceptive of technology, only 22% answered yes. So I think there is a mission for all of us to try and lift that lecture. But it's also clear that cultural and social issues matter. Yet I personally think we have too little analysis of the ethnic, religious, cultural factors that may have significant implications: the adoption of technology, the framing of effective policy and regulation, and hence the delivery of SDGs, which will have to be delivered in nation states. An example of the sort of research that I think is needed, and where's Matthias? This is me reaching out for you as a handmaiden for science. But I think it's interesting research, namely a recent study of grey water use in Qatar, a Muslim country. I don't know of many similar studies. I know of one in Australia about 10 years ago looking at grey water use, but I think it would be really interesting to repeat that standard sort of research in a range of countries, particularly here in Asia, where Singapore, of course, leads in recycled water consumption. Because after all, if we're going to deliver SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, we'd better start making maximum use of recycling of such a precious resource. And of course, the extension to other technologies would be exceedingly useful in framing local policy responses. So how might we improve the social license to operate for technology be improved? I suggest that there are two elements that are essential to even begin to build the case. The first is relevance, the second is trust. Many of us, to get to Tokyo, placed ourselves in the hands of technology. We encased ourselves in an aluminium tube 7 miles above the Earth, carrying several tons of very flammable liquid, a highly risky endeavour. Why did we do it? It's not as if planes don't occasionally fall from the air. We did this because I believe of two things. It did something that we couldn't do or couldn't do as easily, so we accepted the risks of air travel to get here. And secondly, without thinking about it, we trusted the technology. The trust built on, in fact, an intricate web trust network. We trusted the underlying science and technology. We trusted the competency of pilots, trusted engineers who enabled the planes to fly, and trusted the accreditation and regulation systems around air travel. The Australian Chief Scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, has recently argued that to advance artificial intelligence, we need to build such a trust network, and he has advanced some interesting ideas on how that might be done. Such ideas won't necessarily win acceptance for AI, but could go a long way to building a better social acceptability. And with regard to AI, it is important that we talk about the positive applications, such as Advanced for AI for Good and AI for Earth. However, it is important that those problems are motivated by solving a real problem that cannot be solved or solved as easily by simpler and less controversial technologies. But I think, conversely, I'm a little sceptical, or a little cautious, to accept many of the recommendations that go under the banner of responsible research and innovation. There is a great risk that we could shut down even the positive innovation that we desperately need. However, I am convinced that it's no longer reasonable to argue as an engineer or technology developer that the technology is amoral, and that we have no responsibility for what people do, good or bad, with our technology. Certainly effective policy advice is not facilitated by such a position. So that's a segue to the question. And I'd like to close by asking, how is science and technology engaging with the SDGs, and how might that be improved? In my opinion, rather too many of the projects that science and technology and innovation put up as being contributing to the SDGs are technology push, or projects that weren't really devised in the context of the SDGs. To be recorded on an SDG database, or perhaps if you like, given a gold star on that database, I think any proposal needs to meet 3 criteria. It must address a real problem with clear, preferably measurable outcomes that advances at least one SDG. It must analyse how that advance may impact upon the other goals, with a particular focus on the mitigation of detrimental effects, as they already talked about this morning. And finally, it should indicate how that intervention might be trialled so that scale-up is enhanced and the cultural, social issues that might potentially derail adoption are explored. Let me conclude with a specific example to SDG 2, Zero Hunger. It's reasonable to assume to deliver SDG 2, we need increased food supply. Ask an agricultural scientist, they'll say that we need to increase agricultural production through new crop varieties, possibly adapted for climate change. Probably wants extra research funding along the way. While expanding food production and adapting agriculture to climate change are important, in the context of the SDGs, such an approach will almost certainly impact negatively on SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, through a competition for water or agricultural runoff, and SDG 15, life on land, by increasing agricultural production, impacting upon biodiversity. And moreover, the returns from plant breeding, even accelerated by genetic technologies, are probably years, if not a decade, in the making. So could we make a difference more quickly? A little lateral thinking says yes, but we need to focus on the waste that exists in the current production line from farm to plate. In fact, McKinsey have estimated that annually the amount of food wasted globally is equivalent to over 1.4 billion hectares of agricultural production, an area bigger than Canada. Modern data technologies applied across the food chain could dramatically reduce such post-harvest losses. Cutting them in half would feed 1 billion people, therefore advancing SDG 2 with no increased impact on water, biodiversity, etc., at least from a food production perspective. It would also at the same time advance SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. However, to implement such a program requires local action. Thus, we need well-designed pilots that explore not just technical feasibility, but the social, cultural, and regulatory issues involved in widespread adoption. I could give a lot of other examples from the SDG, but my time is up. Hopefully, I will in fact provoke some discussion this afternoon. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So from quite some optimism around socio-techno transformation to a note of caution from distinguished professor. Next, Kay, you specifically asked about the time. You will notice that we have some help here today, so 10 minutes.
So I've been warned, only 10 minutes. That's because I spent an hour on this stage yesterday and giving a lawyer an hour to speak, you know, I may never recover from that. So AI, it's the Harry Potter magic wand of the SDGs. And what worries me about this is that we are all going to go hell for leather saying, oh, we can use AI for this, and we can use AI for that. But if you remember the story, Harry Potter had to go to school for a long time to use the magic wand before he got it right and defeated Voldemort. And so my talk today is really going to be about thinking about how we build firm foundations upon which we can build the resolution using these technologies, and particularly AI in my case, for the benefit of working on the SDGs. So I'm not in research. I head the World Economic Forum's AI work. And what we do is we're at the coalface. We are a do tank, not a think tank. How do we do what we do? Well, what we do is we create governance methods for artificial intelligence. And we do that with various stakeholders, business, government, academia, and civil society. Projects take us about 12 to 18 months to fulfill because we think that there is an urgency about this. And so at the moment, what we're doing is we're trying to build those firm foundations. I'm in the sort of first year of Harry Potter's life. We believe that we need to create firm foundations because, as Professor Barber said, if we don't, then we will lose the trust of those people who we might be able to help with artificial intelligence. So as we build these projects, we need to recognize, because otherwise we won't build that trust, that with AI, there are also some spells that might go wrong. Accountability, transparency, bias, and privacy. So as we think about how to build these firm foundations, I have a few proposals for you in your work. The first is every country needs a national AI strategy. Without a national AI strategy, you really don't have a roadmap to decide what you want to do with AI, where you want to buy it from, and how you want to train your population for it. And until you've got that roadmap, you can't build on solving healthcare with AI, for example, or education with AI. Another reason why I would say it's important to have a national AI strategy is really repeating what Caillou Lee, who, for those of you who don't know, he runs Sinovation Ventures, which is the largest AI venture capital company in the world. He wrote in the New York Times last year that if countries, and this is every country other than the US and China, if countries don't adopt a national AI strategy and actually put some thought into their work, then they will end up as vassal states to the United States and China, which are clearly in the lead in the AI race, or perhaps to those big companies that dominate AI in both of those jurisdictions. Just to give you a quick vignette into thinking about a national AI policy and who you train and how you train it. I was in Tianjin last month. The Tianjin government decided that they would train 150,000 AI scientists next year. And they're doing it. So we, the rest of the world, need to think about how we are going to actually compete in that space. And we can't, until we've worked that out, we can't be working on the SDGs. So just as a way of looking at this, I want to give you the example of two projects that I'm running from the forum. One is a project to work out best practice guidelines for procurement of artificial intelligence by government. The government in question is the UK, and they will pilot the guidelines that we co-create. And the government that backs that is the United Arab Emirates. We're also working with India to think about how to create an AI strategy, and you'll remember all these countries have national AI strategies. How to work out an AI strategy that actually enables small and medium-sized businesses to grow in India using AI. That's the way, in my view, that we might be able to work on some of these SDG challenges. We also, as I said, need to educate our scientists. We don't want to be only looking to Japan for scientists who actually understand social impact. We need to be thinking about how the scientists, the AI scientists that we create or grow in our territories also understand about social impact. So when I was on the stage yesterday, I told this story from Mustafa Suleiman. He's one of the founders of DeepMind. And he said, one of the problems that we have in AI at the moment is that actually most of the brilliant minds are thinking about how to sell more fizzy water as opposed to how to sell clean water or how to develop clean water and meet that sustainable development goal. Finally, I want to talk about education. It's inevitable that we think that AI could be the panacea for education. And we all know that if we educate people, their environments and their living standards get better. But before we do, I encourage you to think about building those firm foundations that I talked about at the beginning. So we have a project at the moment with UNICEF, which looks at AI-enabled dolls. These are toys. These are the toys that you see advertised that are going to help your children learn. Well, unless we put some firm foundations in, what are we going to do about the children's data, our children's data that is sucked up by these devices? And is it going to be monetized? Do our kids ever get the data back? What is the actual education that our kids are receiving? I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of time in researching schools before I sent my child to school. We don't know is the answer. Also, what about our children's creative play. If they're no longer dealing with an invisible friend or creating tea parties as I did for my dolls, what are we actually doing to the creative play? Are we increasing their creative play or are we decreasing it? And does it matter? Do any of these issues matter if we're educating the world? I would suggest they do. And we need those firm foundations before we rush forward with using these technologies to solve the major problems of our world. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying that we shouldn't beta test on our most vulnerable people. So, in conclusion, I would invite you to join our work. We like to have academics, and we like to have scientists, and we like to have countries represented in our projects. Thank you very much.
Even stronger notes of caution from Ms. Butterfield there to take the time to build strong foundations. We'll listen next to Mr. Xavier Estico. Please give him a welcome. He's from the Seychelles.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to participate in this conference. Despite I'm from probably one of the smallest country in the room here, I'm from Seychelles. And what I would like to share with you is more our experience, how we gearing up to be able to be more effective to share information, because information sharing and also interaction is very vital in helping to achieve the goals, because we need to information and data for policymakers, for strategic implementations. So, and also we will share also our experience working with NEPAD and the Observatory of African Science, Technology, Innovation, how we work together to develop also platform for the African continent. What I'm going to present this afternoon is not prescriptive, it's based on our perspective and our context. Brief outline of my presentation. This slide is not just to have a fact sheet of Seychelles, it relates also to when it comes to the challenges we face. And I think where I put the geography and also the demographic data, and I missed probably the economic data, but we're very small. And this map has been very generous to us for the size we represent. We are approximating 100,000 population, and this is a big constraint for us. And we are also a high-income country, which is also a big constraint, because we are small and we cannot, to attract funding is very difficult. So all these will reflect into those challenges that I'll go into. So it's very important that we say, I won't overstate what's been said about the SDGs. There's an urgency because it's less than 12 years to 2030. And when there's an urgency, business cannot be as usual. We have to change the way we work, the approach. So my presentation is focusing on how we share information among disciplines, across communities, across country, even across region. So for us to be able to use this information timely to make decisions or for policy interventions. challenges. The most obvious challenges are those that we can see and are physical. So we start with the infrastructure challenges. We can identify the policy environment is not adequate, the legal framework, lack of poor ICT infrastructure, limited attraction to investment capital, and we also have remoteness and high cost. As an insular state, you have very high cost. We depend a lot, everything has to be imported. But then there is the underlying factor is with us human. And that's what I categorize as the human factor. The human factor challenges are when we share information or we are dealing with data, these are direct factors like errors, awareness of what we're doing, the skills, the experiences. Apathy is a big problem. Incentive and disincentive policy, ignorance and negligence when we're dealing with data, and stress. These are direct human factors, I can say. Then we have the indirect human factors that we have budget, the cultural issues, communication, security policy enforcement, management, and government support. So we can only build efficient information system by being conscious of all those challenges. So how do we work around those challenges? In our context, we go, instead of expensive proprietary software and agreement licensing and consultant, we go for low-cost monthly name user subscriptions. We opt going cloud instead of wasting budget in non-user deliverables. We go for low-cost monthly resource subscriptions, and we go for effectiveness. We deploy the system in very short time, and that's what we go agile, 2 to 3 weeks. And instead of no isolated and lengthy implementation of delivery cycles. So these are the approach we have taken to be able to go around all those challenges. So we came out with a knowledge engagement platform architecture for National Institute for Science, Technology, and Innovation. And this is the architecture. And it is deployable in any devices. And on the front end, you have all those features, front tire. On our National Institute, the back end, we have the document repository, metadata application, and then we have also asset management. But the non-National Institute back tires, we have also other sectors that we are developing modules, like food security is very important for us, so we are looking with farmers application, fishing, and now we're moving into education. But what is important about that is the application program interface manager, the API layer, that we can access all the information and put it on our system so that it can be accessible to all. So this is the architecture we are adopting, so to bring more efficiency in information sharing. So the benefits are improved productivity, encourage collaboration and increase user engagement, prevent knowledge loss, enable better and faster decision making, stimulate innovation and growth, improve analytical data and reporting. So coincidentally, when we were working with our own data, we were trained by NEPAD and on research and development, innovation indicators, statistics. So when we were processing our metadata, they got interested of how we're doing it, so they asked us to assist them in developing a platform for AU, for African Union. So we work with them in a consultative committee to come to this platform. This is already launched. This is a way of different African countries can share data, education, science, technology, and different education data. The configuration is different because at the back end, the back tier, you still have individual countries integrated manually, uploaded data sets, whereas in our case it's different. And here I've got some examples of the data that can be accessed on the portal. So those countries that are involved in the R&D, innovation indicator survey, they can have digital platform where they can access those data. This will help our region, our continent. I know in the SADC region, we're looking at harmonizing our STI policy. So we will be conscious what is happening in our member states and also share experience and resources to improve our R&D and innovation, to improve our research and development and innovation in our particular countries and also as a region. This is also the countries that have participated in the survey and the data already on the system. These are some of you got the information about gross expenditure on R&D, innovation, and education data. And I've reached the end of my presentation. I would like to thank you all and expect question and answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Estico, giving us an example of business not as usual. Thank you very much. And finally, we have Dr. Colglazier, who's going to be giving us an example of how to coordinate our efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be with you today. I'm going to talk about harnessing science, technology, innovation, but particularly the key word in my title is action. That's going to help generate the action that we need to achieve the SDGs. You're going to find my talk is very similar to what you heard in the plenary session this morning from Dr. Nakamura and Klaus Tillms from the World Bank. We sort of plot together. I served for 2 years, 2016, 2017, as the co-chair of the 10-member group of the Technology Facilitation Mechanism, this strange name, at the UN, advising on the role of science, technology, innovation for achieving the SDGs. And one of my colleagues on the 10-member group called the SDGs a great gift to the world, which I think is true. And it's not just a great gift to humanity, a great gift to the world. In part, his rationale for that is it has longevity to 2030. No matter how deeply you're involved in one topic, you have to pick out the impact on all of the other goals. Recognition by the UN of the importance of science, technology, innovation. It applies to all countries, which really was a great achievement. I want to go back just a little bit in time. For 17 years, I sort of learned science advice and on-the-job training. I was the executive officer of the National Academy of Sciences, and my role was to oversee all the studies that are done from the 3 academies: science, engineering, and medicine. But roughly 200 studies a year on every kind of topic you can conceive of where information from science and technology, medicine, engineering are relevant. About 70% requested by the government, but often the government would request advice that go beyond what can actually be said from science or what is not known from science. And so the recommendations in some sense involved value judgments. And so and I was in the session this morning dealing with the humanities and the social sciences. So one of our challenges was when we're making recommendations that really involve value judgments, how do you be very clear about what the rationale, the evidence that's used, there's lots of evidence besides from scientific evidence in justifying the decisions and recommendations you're making. This is one study done in 1999 called Our Common Journey. It was actually funded by a private individual. It was to look at the issues related to science and technology for sustainable development. In the title is actually a play on words of the famous Brundtland Report, Our Common Future. And again, the emphasis here is on the word journey. Achieving sustainable development really is a journey. And I forgot to make one comment this morning. I have great respect for Helen Clark, but on one aspect I differ from her opinion. She and also the U.S. government at the time I was serving as the Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary of State were pressing hard in the negotiations for having a small number of goals, saying that if you have too many goals, you have no priorities. I think it actually turned out right with 17 goals, which are really all-encompassing. To me, the SDGs are really a practical, political definition of sustainable development. It's all clearly value judgments, but it's got something in there, including if you look at the targets and the indicators, it has something for almost everything that people are interested in. Well, our common journey, I want to show one quote from that, which I think really encapsulates what this task of the 2030 Agenda is required. Remember, this is in 1999. I'll just read it. Any successful quest for sustainability will be a collective, uncertain, and adaptive endeavor in which society's discovering of where it wants to go is intertwined with how it might get there. And it must use knowledge intelligently in setting goals, providing needing indicators and incentives, capturing and diffusing innovation, carefully examining alternatives, establishing effective institutions, and more generally encouraging good decisions and taking appropriate actions. And I think that really is the essence of the journey that we're on. But as we all know, there are lots of challenges in achieving the SDGs. I just lift some of them here, and they've been talked about in this session. I love the aspirational rhetoric, but we know the real hard task is really the sustaining the funding and the action and the policies that are going to achieve the SDGs. We know the targets don't cover all the essential elements that are really required. Although in some cases the targets are quite good. If you look at the health SDG, actually the targets there really do cover many of the things that almost lay out a plan for what to do regarding the health SDG. Countries provide voluntary national reviews. They're useful, but they're not really action plans in most cases. Stakeholder engagement in preparing these plans is weak in most countries. And some countries are paying attention, and that certainly includes my country, the United States, at least at the government level right now. Well, how can science engineering help to drive progress? These are kind of 5 simple ideas, and I've sort of underlined the 2 that I'm going to spend time in my few minutes on. Obviously, advising on challenges, providing indicators, and monitoring. But the key thing to me, and this is a lot of what Dr. Nakamura talked about, advising on policies and actions with periodic feedback on what's working and not working, really produce roadmaps produced through engagement with societies, with stakeholders, but also searching for new innovative solutions. The one remarkable thing about science and technology, it can actually provide new solutions that actually leap over diplomatic obstacles, over political obstacles, and sometimes offer a solution that wasn't visible before. And of course, INGSA is worried a lot about the science policy interface. If at the end of the 2030 Agenda, if we create more knowledge-based economies, I think that in itself will be a tremendous achievement. Let me give a view from the World Bank, and apologies to my friend Klaus this morning. This really deals with the challenge of disruptive technologies. The bank and Klaus are very much focused on this, and I think they're exactly right. As we all know, technologies are a double-edged sword. They're tremendous opportunities, and I'm an optimist, but there are also great challenges that are provided. When I was the Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary of State, I interacted with our intelligence agencies, trying to anticipate what are some of the things that might come from technologies looking to the future. What future worlds might we expect? I have to admit we did not anticipate at all the use of social media. We were worried about cyber intrusion actually getting into voting machines. We didn't realize it was going to be hacking people's minds and hacking our democracy. So trying to figure out exactly what the implications are of technology is not an easy task, even for the technologists. So with these disruptive technologies, we have to look at both the upside as well as the downside. But I think the last point down there, failing to take advantage of the opportunities of the disruptive technologies could even be more costly. So, well, the 3 key areas that I focus on, the first one really deals with this STI for SDG roadmaps. Most of the real action is going to be at the national level. Klaus and Dr. Nakamura talked about it, STI for SDG roadmaps. at the national and the global level, but we need those roadmaps also at the subnational, at every level, in fact, even at the institutional level, at the city level. I just came from a meeting of the world's engineering societies, where the engineering societies are preparing their own roadmaps of how they can contribute to the SDGs. But the second one down here is the use of science really to understand what the impact is on the global constraints on our Earth system. Because every country really has to understand how they can help deliver their share of global responsibilities. In the third area, again, is this issue of disruptive technologies. All of us involved in science advice have to advise both on the upside and the downside and what we can do to deal with the potential negative impacts of our transformational and disruptive technologies. But my last two slides, just to mention two reports you might want to look at. One is called the World in 2050 report. It was produced by a group of over 100 scientists around the world. The International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Vienna, Austria, led it. It's a very wordy report, like a lot of scientific reports, but I think they focused on the assessments, and it was World in 2050, so it's going beyond 2030. They focused on the 6 big transformations that are really required in order to achieve sustainable development in the long run. And I would recommend that you read this report. Human capacity and demography, education, healthcare, consumption, production with industries, food, biosphere, and water, smart cities, and the digital revolution. They had a great name there. We all are focused on digital technologies. They use the word, we all know the word Anthropocene, the fact we're in the geologic epoch that's really influenced by mankind. They call it the digital Anthropocene. We really haven't seen anything yet until we really see the speed and the rapidity which is going to occur with digital technology. So that's one report. Another one, and this will be my last slide, the Global Solutions Summit is part of the STI Forum at the UN. This past year, the day before, there was a meeting called the Global Solutions Summit. And it's really focusing on developing countries from the lab to the last mile, technology deployment, business models for the SDGs. The main point is we have a lot of existing technologies that can help meet the needs in the developing world, and the key task is actually the business models that get those technologies deployed to where they're needed, and how do we scale them up to the right amount to have the significant impact. So again, this is a report you might be interested in looking at. And the very last thing I'll mention, for those of you who get the slides, I'm editor-in-chief of a little journal called Science and Diplomacy, which gives me the opportunity to write a lot of editorials, which is fun. But the last one, the most recent one, is on science diplomacy and future worlds, which is technologists are not much better than anybody else in trying to anticipate what future worlds are going to look like, particularly dealing with human affairs. But it's interesting to kind of speculate on what is the role of science and technology in all these future worlds that are worth thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Colglazier. I am sure we are all really itching to get in. But before we do that, I'd just like to observe, I just want to bring us back to the main question of the session, being that we all agree that the global goals really have the power to, we believe that they have the power to end poverty, fight inequality, and stop climate change, among other things. And it seems to me that the panel is telling us that we really have to think carefully about how we go about utilizing socio-techno transformation in meeting these goals. So there are benefits, but there are also a lot of risks. So we should be optimistic about the benefits, but be cautious as to the risks that we face. My own reflection on this is that, in a way, digital transformation has taken on a life of its own, and we see that there are these unanticipated outcomes. Bill, you just mentioned social media. And we are also aware that systems in different parts of the world have different robustness. Some don't work very well, some work quite well. And to speak of how we act globally is a little bit difficult. You also have to think about contexts and what is possible in different contexts. So some models may fit and some may not fit. And I really appreciated something that someone said this morning, the fact that with such pressure, thinking that we have only 12 years and some indicators are only worsening and not going in the direction that we hope, it would seem that things have to happen all at once. We have to leapfrog, we have to innovate while also dealing with unanticipated outcomes. So it's really quite a complex environment that we are trying to work in, especially as scientists trying to advise governments. So that's my impression of the talks. And I'd really like to now welcome some questions from the floor. There's already a hand there. Do we have microphones? Yeah, of course. There's a hand down there. Sir Peter has a question. And the gentleman there. There's a hand on my far left.
Yeah.
Is there another microphone down here, please? State your name and question as briefly as possible, please.
My name's Royston. I come from Mumbai. I run the Grameen office there. Grameen is the Nobel Peace Prize winner. And I was with Jeffrey Sachs and Achim Steiner speaking at the UN last month in New York. My question seems to come around a theme that's troubling me in some ways, where we talk about science and the future world. And my concern seems to be the opportunity is the now world. And I think we're focused probably, and maybe that's the question, are we focused too much on the future and not so much on the now? In India, I chair Grameen, which has 30 million women clients. If the technology that you talk about, if the science that you talk about can be brought right now to the 30 million women clients at the bottom of the pyramid, whether it's blockchain, whether it's AI, whether it's ML, whatever else it is, the leapfrogging that you mentioned, probably we need to make the connect with the now a lot more strong than with the future.
Thank you very much. Any of you can comment on that a bit later, but let's just collect some questions. Yes.
Peter Gleitman. Apart from my role on INGSA and ISC, I also sit on the OECD Digital Advisory Board. And I've got really a comment and a question, and they're related. Kay raised the issue of national strategy. The issue is to what extent we actually need a global strategy, given that so much of this is going to be driven by platform companies, either in this form or another form to come. The second point, which I think all of you in a sense address, is the issue of the SDGs are both about planetary well-being, but also human well-being. And the issues that I think are already emerging fast is that human well-being, and Kay again made the point, is not necessarily going to be advanced by these technologies, despite all the techno-enthusiasm that's out there. Most of the technical enthusiasm comes from the corporate sector, which has driven a very specific view of the world. It's going to improve productivity, deal with the productivity growth, etc., make life much better. And that may be true, but as the INGSA report, which is now on the website, points out, there's many domains of well-being for which this technology may or may not make things worse. And I think unless we have urgent research and preemptive policy thinking about these issues, rather than waiting till after the technology's been exploited, we may make things work, may not do as well as we think we will with these technologies.
Right.
I encourage everybody to read the INGSA report, which is not a solution report. It identifies the research needs and the policy needs.
Thanks a lot. In the back, just there, behind you, and then.
Thank you. Andrew Adams, Meiji University. My question is specifically for Ms. Butterfield, but the others may have a point on this as well. There was a recent report by the BBC on the use of what's effectively digital sweatshop labour in many of the current developments in AI. And I find this very concerning. I think we're seeing a replication of an imperialist attitude towards the labour in some of these countries. And I echo what the previous question just said, that we may be looking at situations where we're going to make things worse in the pursuit of some of these technologies? How can we ensure that in the pursuit of the potential gains that these technologies may promise, that we don't make things worse initially and possibly make things worse for many in the long run while we get there?
Okay, thanks a lot. Finally, Mark down here.
Yeah, Mark Sanner. I am afraid my question is also a bit negative on technology, but I'm just curious if you would like to comment on what's sometimes called the pacing problem, the fear that the speed of new technology outpaces lawmakers, judges, politicians, society, distracts us and leads to some sense of technological determinism.
Yes, my point exactly, actually, Mark. All right, we have Shalini down here. That will be the last one for now, and I'll ask the panel to respond.
Hi, I'm Shalini from Mumbai, India, and a member of GYA. So basically, I want to know that technology is a double-edged tool. Sometimes, of course, no doubt that the technology helps to meet the SDGs, but is it also possible that this technology also brings an inequality? Because when you talk about any technology, you need engineers, you need educated people. So what about those who are unskilled and not educated?
Okay, thanks a lot, Shalini. Are you ready to go? I see you have the, yeah.
Okay. On that question from Mark, I think the report that Peter spoke about, the wellbeing report, which I was a member of the conference in London, one of the issues that it did pick up was the speed of technology, the speed of its change it was driving, and some really fundamental questions about how that related to our speed of adoption, the capacity of individuals to change, the capacity of societies to change. And I think that's a very, very fruitful area for us to understand much better. And it comes back to cognitive processes. Are we changing the way our kids learn? Get away from a lot of emotive issues about, smartphones are bad for kids. I can remember the days when TV was bad for kids. But that report did focus very specifically on that part of our lack of understanding of just that, even that interaction of us as human beings with technology.
Yeah, thanks a lot, yes.
So I wanted to start with the very first question, and I agree with you that we need to look at the power of technology now to help people, but equally we need to be mindful of the risks involved. I'm often asked in conferences, not with scientists in, but when do you expect superintelligence? And I say, okay, well, I don't know, but let's talk about the things that we need to do now. And I think that speaks to your question. So Peter, you mentioned we need global strategies. I agree with you, and my point about national strategies rather echoed the question from the third question, I think it was, about the fact that there's a sort of imperialist feel about some of this technology, that the platforms, the big US platforms, and of course China, are selling themselves and saying, we are the panacea for your ills. And without a national strategy, you don't know whether you want to buy that or not. And so that was my point on national strategies. But with regard to global work, we are at the forum creating something that we call the Global AI Council. And that will include prime ministers and presidents from around the world, CEOs from businesses, from startup to large corporation, academics, and heads of civil society, because we do agree with Sir Peter that we need to have a global view as well. Then just going to the final point, yes, one of the things that worries me most in my work is that what we may see is that as AI benefits the people who are already rich, in living in already rich countries, the rest of the world will get left behind, which of course neatly takes us back to the first point, which is we need to be doing something about that now. And anybody with ideas about projects I could do to address that, I would be really grateful to hear from you.
Excellent. Ms. Butterfield, Dr. Colglazier?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the first question. The Global Solutions Summit was exactly aimed at the question you're asking. How can we take existing technologies now and the business models that really can provide them quickly? On the issue of disruptive technologies on the downside of the negative sides, coming from this STI forum, which there'll be another one next June feeding into the, this review over the 4-year period related to trying to achieve the goals. There are a number of countries that are very much focused on this issue of the negative impacts. One of the co-chairs of the forum is from Mexico, and Mexico has been emphasizing that heavily. So really the question is sort of that balance between the opportunities versus the challenges and how we're going to potentially deal with the downside. My own personal view is we have to spend as much time thinking about the downside as we do about the upside.
Okay. Yeah, may I ask, Mr. Estico, you work in my continent, which is similar to what Shalini was saying. What are the opportunities in the network that you were talking about for helping us achieve the skills that we need to really bridge this divide, this digital divide at this moment?
I think the digital device, digitalization of the process we share information is very important because, the current way we share information is a bit, the efficiency. We need to improve the efficiency. For example, in the system we're proposing is that, reports take 3 weeks or 3 months to generate, but it can be generated digitally very fast. That can bring decision-making process faster. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't have a lot of experience on the continent. I do have exposure to working with NEPAD. And I think what is bringing into is that we become more aware of our situation in the region, like SADC, also in Africa, on indicators that are very, very important for our development. So this is even important because the SDGs, we need the indicators, we need to measure, we need to monitor, we need policies to achieve those goals. So when we share information timely, and irrespective that when we say in the data world, the credibility, whatever issues about data sharing, but the instrument that will make it more efficient to share and to interact is very, very important. I think this is what my contribution to the conversation is about the using the technology, the innovation to be able to share it. But I would like to also to probably extend, the lady from India. Mm-hmm. I think when we say about double-edged sword, I think it's also looking at technology in terms of what are the opportunities and also the threats in each national context, because we need technology, but we also need to be cautious. These are the opportunities that the technology are bringing, but what are the threats, and what are the measures taken to be able to take advantage of the opportunity and to deal also with the threats.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
So I think you addressed what Ms. Butterfield was just saying about a strategy that many of us, many of these countries of ours lack. Before I come back quickly to the floor, I just want to ask Dr. Takeda. You had a project that bridges this or brings together industry and government to work on the SDGs, and it would seem that a lot of people have very low trust or expectation from industry to really care about the planet or even human well-being. I don't know what you have to say about how scientists and government, apart from Japan, like more globally, what advice would you give for us to engage? It's a big question, I think. Yes. Any advice will be appreciated.
I was not thinking of advising to the global governments, but one thing I would like to say is that we need to, as I said, academia and industries and the government were traditionally independent. And even in Japan, we were independent. So, but in this occasion, under the existence of SDGs, I first recognized the collaboration of the government and industries and academia. So promoting and inventing some new form of academia, industry, and the government collaboration will lead to solve the question you raised, I think.
Do you want to comment on the benefit to industry of such a collaboration? Because there's definitely a benefit to government, maybe to academia as well. How would we sell it?
But industries are always working for the society and for the human. Mm. So it's not special. It's doing a good thing for it's working for welfare, of course, in a part. So we were the people, and we are not different from the government and government and academic people.
Okay.
So please collaborate.
Yes, thanks a lot. We have a minute or two for two more questions from the floor. I'll take yours, sir. And anyone in the back I might have missed? No? One more then.
Hello, I'm Carlos Aveledo from Argentina, University of Buenos Aires. And it seems to me, I mean, my impression, I would like a comment from the panel, that in the context of science advice, we should be standing in a position at arm's length of the benefit or non-benefit or benefit of or precautions of, say, science, technology, higher technologies, I mean, and so on for development goals. That, I mean, I think when we put in a position of science advice to government, or whether it's regional governments or international governments, what is expected of us is to be sort of critical of what are the options, and then rather than be an advocate of specific solutions for, say, for goal 1, for goal 2, for goal 3, for goal 4. And as has been pointed out, I mean, there are these conflicting goals of, for example, food versus environment and so on. That I think this is the place where good science advice should be available to weigh plus and cons of different options.
Yeah.
I would like some comments.
Would you like to comment, Professor? Okay, just pass the mic, please.
No, thank you. That's a very good question. When I had the role at the U.S. National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, the whole purpose was to give objective advice to the government and society that was not controlled by the government. And so our focus was on maintaining that independence. And although advice giving is a human endeavor, nevertheless trying to do the best we could to say what is known from science, what is not known, if we make recommendations that are broader to explain what the rationale was. It's another task actually in GATE, but I think it was very important even in that to understand exactly what the needs were, the questions that were being asked by the government, and that really did require engagement to understand why the government was asking a particular question. But the other task is actually this, so you might say the public-private partnerships, the technologists working with the government, working with the corporations, trying to come up with solutions, listening to the stakeholders in society. So it's a different task. So I think the science community needs to be involved on both, giving objective advice that's not controlled by the government, as well as actually engaging and help to try to produce solutions together. But I think they're two different tasks.
Yes, thank you very much. Anyone else want to comment? Okay, I will now ask each of you, members of the panel, to just give us your final reflection with respect to the issue of socio-techno transformation and the global goals. The room is, this is a conference on science advice for governments, and from academics mostly and from researchers. What would be your recommendation, your one recommendation, shall we say, on how they can go about advising to maximize the benefits from socio-techno transformation while minimizing the risks? Okay.
I'll have a go, Connie.
Yes.
And I think it actually comes back to the question of now and the future. And to my third point, which I made about us having pilots and scaling up. I am afraid my last 2 or 3 years engagement with the UN system and strategies and global roadmaps, etc., has disillusioned me in some ways. On the converse, I actually think the SDGs out there have stimulated what I've called elsewhere 1 million flowers. And my concern is that those experiments, whether they're in Bangalore or in Quito or in Tokyo, we don't know about them, we don't learn about them, we don't cross the barriers, we reinvent the wheel. And I actually think that finding a mechanism by which that science advice, along with something that certainly in Australia works well, if you can tell a minister there's a bright idea he can put his name on, then you usually get some progress. And if it's sufficiently well developed in Wales or Canada, that will certainly motivate our ministers because they like overseas examples. So I suppose my single message is, as science advisors, academics working in this space, drop down, look what's happening, draw your friends across this network to say what has worked here, can we import it to solve that problem there, can we fix girls in school here? I think that to me is the single biggest issue.
Thank you very much. Professor Barber, would you like to go next, Dr. Takeda?
An advice to the governments of all the countries is a too big program for me. But I just handed out an advice to the Japanese government, and if it will have an effect in Japan, then I would like to see it as the best practice, and to think of adopting our way in each country. Yeah. That's my advice. Thank you.
So if there are any scientists here who would like to put a minister's name to this initiative here, please go ahead. Ms. Butterfield.
Well, I think I come back to the fact that AI is a powerful tool for good, but unless we build it some firm foundations, then it may well go off the rails. And so I would come back to whether you work in a municipal government or a state government or a national government or an international government, don't just think that you can wave the magic wand and AI will do the SDGs for you. Think very carefully about how you apply this amazing technology.
Thank you very much. So a minute each for our last two, less than a minute if you can.
My last comment will be that in this advisory process, it's an information sharing with policymakers, decision makers, and I think the using the innovation and technology to increase the efficiency, how we share information, because this is very important to create what you call the situational awareness of the issues we're dealing with. a lot of policies, we don't have enough situation awareness, and that's the result of the policy intervention may not come to the desired goals. Okay. So I think this is we need to have this, bring out as much situation awareness to decision makers, policy makers, regulators through the digital technology we have today.
Thank you, Mr. Estico. Thank you very much. Lastly.
Yeah, well, first, let me give a compliment to Japan. I think it's quite remarkable what Japan is able to do. The corporate sector, the political sector, the university sector, all of civil society, and thinking about the role of science and technology for the SDGs. Not many countries can do that. But my advice would actually be to all of us, whether it's an individual or the institution you're in, a university, a corporation, in a city, regional government, all of us need to think about what exactly is our role, what is the roadmap we're going to develop by engaging with the stakeholders in our own institution, how we can contribute over these remaining 12 years. I think the real power of achieving the 2030 agenda is going to come from unleashing all this creativity from many different levels of society, and that includes at the national level and the global level too. I see the real changes are going to be coming by having people everywhere really working on this issue, trying to figure out how they fit in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a very big hand clap for our panel. And, thank you very much, and thank you for your attention and participation.